Sis, classy, she a queen, so call her your majesty, your highness, and she stay cocoa buttered up, so she forever shining. The epitome of everything womanly. She a deity to me, male feminine, aka black woman. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me. I walk around town and let my melanin glow. Long hair, don't care, a teeny weeny afro. So when you walk around town, let your melanin glow, girl. Cause we so full of magic, we should let it show. We so innovative, we so damn creative. Effortless style, where you get that, I made it. It comes naturally. We don't follow, we lead. Sensuality, strength and vulnerability. Educated, complicated, made beautifully, yet unappreciated in society. So this is for the pretty brown girls like me. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me. So if you love the skin you're in, and you know that you're winning, say hey. Don't be afraid to shine. Hold your head up high and say hey. When the world puts you down, stand up tall, fix your crown and say hey. And if you're melanin proud, turn this song up loud and say hey. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me. This one's for my melanin queens. This is for the girls that look like me. This is for the girls that look like me.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world today. Welcome, everyone, to the Fall 2022 Pride Speaker Series event, Race and the Early Childhood Profession, Why We Can't Look Away. I'm Aisha White, Director of the P.R.I.D.E program, and I have to say I am very, very, very excited and honored to be moderator of tonight's event. I just want to quickly say, if you haven't already, please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. We're so glad that you chose to take time out of your busy schedules to be with us. We have a really impressive lineup of women with us tonight who are doing very important work as early childhood care and education leaders, researchers, and practitioners. And as I was thinking about today's event, I realized just how much the early childhood field needs them, how much children and families and educators need them, and how much we all need them, because their work is so critical to changing the profession, to changing the way children, families, and educators relate to each other and to changing the way we all see the world and interact in the world. Needless to say, we are in store for what I anticipate to be an engaging and thought-provoking evening. We have a lot packed in, so let me get started. I'd like to begin by thanking our current funders, the Henry L. Hillman Foundation, the Grable Foundation, and the Opportunity Fund. Without their generous support, we would not have a P.R.I.D.E program. I'd also like to thank the P.R.I.D.E team, which includes Medina Jackson, our Director of Engagement, Heidi Green, our Administrative and Communications Coordinator, Jessica Cochran, our Training Coordinator Consultant, and Daryl Wade, our Communications Manager Consultant. Thank you all for all you do for the P.R.I.D.E program. To give you all an idea of how the evening will play out, we'll first hear from our artistic presenter, Lisa Brown, after which we'll have a conversation with the panel members. Then we'll cover a few questions from the audience, so please do post your questions in the Q&A box. Next, we'll pop in a poll question to get your feedback on the event. We'll raffle off a couple of the guest books and then close things out. The event is being recorded, so if you have something pressing and you have to jump off, you'll still have access to the webinar. Before I introduce our first guest, I'd like to share just a little bit of information about the P.R.I.D.E professional development, which the current speaker series is modeled after. Since 2018, the P.R.I.D.E program has been delivering professional development sessions to educators, librarians, and others working with young children using a 5-part model that covers the following. Doing your internal racial awareness work, learning about the history of race and racism in America, gaining awareness of the history of race and racism in the early care and education profession, learning about how children become aware of and are impacted by race, and exploring ways participants can apply what they've learned in the series in the classroom or wherever they engage with young children. If you have any questions about our professional development work, feel free to reach out to us. And now our artistic presenter. Originally from Johannesburg, South Africa, Lisa Brown is currently Senior Manager in the Equity Initiatives Department at First Up, an early childhood organization based in Philadelphia. Her work involves partnering with early childhood educators, families, and systems leaders to impact the adults central in the lives of young children. She has developed and facilitated training for early childhood professionals and families to support social justice by addressing the effects of bias and racism in early childhood and the impact of trauma on young children, families, and the early education workforce. An ECE professional for over 12 years, she's had experience as an instructional administrator, a training facilitator, a consultant, and a program director. She is also the founder of Colorful Stories, a program that helps families and educators use books to have meaningful conversations with young children. Let's give her a warm virtual welcome. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. It's such an honor to be here with everybody. And so I'm going to jump right into it. So as many of you know, it can be very, very difficult to find high quality biographical texts about historical figures for young children that are developmentally appropriate, but they aren't too young to be engaged in these readings, right? So I found this to be the case in teaching and learning about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I found this amazing text over here titled, Who Was Martin Luther King Jr.? And the book is by Elizabeth Kaiser. Oftentimes in my work, educators and families will ask me, well, like, where do you start when it comes to having these conversations, and what are you supposed to say to young children, right? And so my role, as Dr. White shared, is supporting grownups and using children's books as tools to have those meaningful and developmentally appropriate conversations with children. So I'm going to go ahead and sample what that looks like. How can we actually take a book like this, a diverse book? We've heard for the last couple of years, people are saying, use those diverse books, buy those diverse books, but some of us might have them on our shelves, and I want to get to the how do we actually engage children in conversations as well as activities when we're using these books. And the way that we're going to do that is we are going to use the anti-bias education goals to support us in that work. So as you can see, this would be an appropriate book reading and conversation, as well as support and activities for children 2 years old and older. The themes that you could find yourself engaging as you're walking through this book with young children include, but are not limited to, personal identity, family, activism, history, justice, empathy, community involvement. And so, like I said, to support us, we're going to use the anti-bias education framework, which consists of 4 goals. In this example, we're going to focus on goal 1, which is each child will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive social identities. I don't know about y'all, but when I read that, I think, oh my goodness, I want that for my own children. And I think I want that for everybody's children, right? So think of these goals as a means for us to be working and guiding inclusive conversations, as well as think of them as we're examining our teaching and playing and the ways in which we uplift children and their many identities. So as with most read aloud experiences, we begin the book reading by calling attention to the cover of the book, where we can look for images as well as words and clues that tell us what this book might be about, right? So keeping in mind, we're not necessarily looking for the right answers when we are speaking to children and having these conversations. And we also should not be coming to the conversation assuming what they do know and what they don't know. But we can simply begin a book reading with this particular book by just asking the question, does anyone see someone that they recognize on the cover of this book? Another thing that adults can then say after engaging in this conversation is, this was Dr. Martin Luther King when he was a boy. And then we can just simply flip the page and say, this was Dr. Martin Luther King when he was older. Dr. Martin Luther King identified as a Black man. We celebrate him because he helped many people around the world to see unfairness. Now, as we continue to flip through the pages of this story, which I can demonstrate here, one might say something like, this was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s family, his father, his sister, his brother, his mother, and him. They were eating a meal together and talking. And this is right here where that goal 1 can come into play, right? And we say, and we engage the kids in a meaningful conversation. We can say, well, who are the people in your family? What is so special about each of those people in your family? And then we can ask them questions like, do you eat together? Or we can even say, what does it look like when you eat meals together? And so the resource continues to actually share questions like the one above that are connected to the goal, and it goes page by page by page. We are not going to get to all of those pages now, but I am going to flip through the rest of the resource and show you some of the other things that we can, some of the other ways we can be engaging in these conversations, right? So when I was working with young children, I might say something like, I might be looking for ways to engage them and share my own personal experiences. And I might say something like, in our home, we celebrate birthdays by coming together as a family. We all eat the birthday person's favorite food. And then the birthday person gets to blow out their candles on their cake. And our favorite part is when we sing the birthday songs, right? So in my family, we sing 2 birthday songs. It's the Stevie Wonder version and then the traditional English version. And then this is a great way for us as adults to remember we are actively doing this work alongside children. And so we are engaging and bringing our whole selves to the experience in our work, whether you are in community or teaching children or even in your home, right? And then over here, I might use simple language like this with kids. And I say, you know, to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King, we had a birthday party where we danced to music in our home. And it included, like I said, the birthday song. We also looked at images of Dr. King with his family and looked for what was the same and what was different about our families. I can continue by saying things like, we did some research about Dr. Martin Luther King's favorite foods, and according to his family and friends, his favorite foods included fried chicken and pecan pie. We actually, as a family, we go ahead and we make these foods and incorporate them into our celebration as a household. And so the resource will be available later on. But at this point, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to share a snippet of the practical ways that grown-ups can be engaging in developmentally appropriate and meaningful conversations, as well as activities using the anti-bias education framework.
Can we send a virtual thank you to Lisa for that? Lisa, that was great. When I first saw it, the first thing that came to mind for me was how much it humanized Dr. King, and then also how much it makes the experience of reading the book come alive, but also become so much more personal for children. So thank you for those great ideas, and I hope folks will take advantage of being able to access the information later on. Thanks again. So moving along, we have a larger than usual panel tonight. And so I'm going to introduce everyone. So bear with me. I have somewhat brief, but not really very short introductions. I do want you to know a little bit about our panelists. And so I will start with Dr. Stephanie M. Currington. She is a tenured associate professor in the Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Her studies focus on the social, cognitive, and language development of low-income and minority children within a range of ecological contexts. She has served as associate editor for the journals Early Childhood Research, Quarterly, and Early Education and Development, and she has received research policy fellowships from the Society for Research on Child Development and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Her research has been funded by foundations and federal programs, including, but not limited to, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the National Academy of Science, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. She also has served on the board of directors of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, and local Head Start programs. Welcome, Stephanie. Dr. Tanya Durden is a clinical associate professor and Birth Through 5 program coordinator in the Department of Early Childhood and Elementary Education at Georgia State University. Dr. Durden's research explores creating racially equitable learning experiences for racially and ethnically diverse children. Her professional work and her scholarship cover 3 focus areas: early childhood education, racial educational equity, and early childhood systems engagement, which entail, respectively, exploring curriculum and program development, research to professional practice, and strategic partnerships and equitable systems building. Dr. Durden is committed to using teacher education and research to develop educators and leaders who become culturally responsive change agents and advocates in their classrooms and communities. Welcome, Tanya. Dr. Carrie Ann Skye is a tenured associate professor of early childhood education at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. As an anti-racist and anti-colonial scholar committed to fostering Pan-African unity and racial equity in the early years, Dr. Sky challenges racial and economic injustices affecting Black children and families in the US, in Canada, and in the Caribbean. The theoretical approaches she employs range from Black feminism, anti-colonialism, and anti-racism to Caribbean anti-colonial theory, as well as creative expressions of resistance, including short stories, poetry, and other fictional modes, which she has used to author a series of children's books. As an advocate for anti-racism and early childhood education, Dr. Sky has also created a set of anti-racist professional development modules for early childhood educators. Welcome, Carrie Ann. And of course, last but not least, is Dr. Ioma U. Aruka, who is a research professor in public policy, a fellow at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, and the founding director of the Equity Research Action Coalition at Frank Porter Graham Institute at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dr. Aruka is leading projects and initiatives focused on ensuring that minoritized children and children from low-income households, especially Black children, are thriving through the intersection of anti-bias, anti-racist, culturally grounded research, programming, and policy. Some of her focus areas include family engagement and support, quality rating and improvement systems, and early care and education systems and programs. She serves on numerous national and local boards and committees, including the National Advisory Committee for the U.S. Census Bureau, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the American Psychological Association Board of Educational Affairs. Welcome, Ioma. Oh, I need to take a little breath after that one. All right, so why don't we start off by having each of you share your own perspective on the history of race and racism in early care and education, and some of the ways you believe that it impacts classrooms today. And so I'm going to start in alphabetical order with Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting us here. I hope this is going to be as fun as our usual panel sessions that we have together. So I'll start us off with bringing the joy and bringing hopefully the fire. I think some of the things that that I think about when I think about racism in the early childhood years, I think about how our whole knowledge base of child development is tainted by racism. So everything that we learn in terms of how children learn and grow, what they can do, the timing in which they sort of learn and grow was really based upon like white children. It really was done at the exclusion of children of color, particularly Black children. And so that makes me question the very foundation of sort of what we think we know about children. And I think the other thing that happens on top of that as well, when we think about the practices that we're doing on a daily basis with our young children, again, our knowledge base, our science, our research base, again, it has been so whitewashed that the ways in which we think it is developmentally appropriate to act are ways in which that have also been sort of tainted by by a biased kind of like research base. And that is something that I hope that we are trying to change and that we are putting out there with new information that opens the field up to see that it doesn't have to be that way and that it shouldn't be that way. So that's how I'll start us.
Okay, and I just want to say that you all don't know this, but when we do present our P.R.I.D.E trainings, your faces are on a slide as the new voices in presenting these philosophies on early childhood education. So yes, you are being shown and shared. How about you, Tanya?
Well, hello. First, I want to thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about what I love to talk about, which is all about race and Black children. And I want to give a shout out to my students because many of them I see are here, and I know they're here because they're interested in this amazing topic and not because I'm giving extra credit. So shout out to my amazing students. But when I think about racism in early childhood education, it reminds me of the research and the work that I did as a graduate student many years ago, where I actually looked at Black independent schools and African-centered schools. Because when we think about the history of education with Black children, it really started in Black churches and in Black communities. And it wasn't until we really saw education as a racist construct until integration. And so if we really want to peel back the layers of how racism has really in our society has perpetuated, into our educational system, into teacher education, into our ways in which we measure quality and we think about quality, we really have to take a step back and say, well, what were the experiences, the educational experiences of Black children and Black teachers before integration? And so I like to always situate Black joy, Black experience, Black culture, Black amazingness within the context of not even our place and space here in America and the US, because that's a function of educational racism as well when you start a history with slavery, right? That the only context and knowledge you have about Black and brown people and children revolves around negative portrayals of Black and brown children. And so we really have to think about it from also a historical context of African civilizations and ancient Kemet. And so when we think about racism in early childhood today, currently, we have to think about why is there an absence of images, just simple basic images, of Black excellence in early childhood classrooms? Why is there an absence of the multiple ways in which we demonstrate our amazingness, right? Our awesomeness, our knowledge, our experiences, our language, our movement, our verve, all those things that make us Black people. Why is there an absence? Why is there a void? Why do Ioma, Stephanie, Carrie Ann, and I have to fight so hard just to say our children are here? That's not how we learn. That's not how we teach. Why do we have to do that in such a fierce way? So that's my thoughts just to start it off.
Thank you, Tanya. How about you, Carrie Ann?
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm a bit of a storyteller. So allow me to take you on this historical trip. Anti-Black racism and its supporting racial ideology that positions Blackness as inferior, as subhuman, are quite evident in the constructions of childhood, the category of children, for example, who belongs to this category, who is viewed as a child, and by extension, the concept of innocence. By way of example, I'll focus on the narratives, the experiences of enslaved children. Enslaved children were property. And as a result, they were denied their basic human rights. They were robbed of their childhood. And consequently, one of the major joys of childhood, that is the right to play. Furthermore, enslaved children not only experience abuse, all kinds of abuse, but also witness physical violence inflicted on their parents and on those they love. Once examined carefully, we can see there are parallels between past and present Black childhoods. For example, when a Black boy or a Black girl is viewed as a threat and not as a child, is seen as older than they really are, it is quite evident that these anti-Black racist ideologies are informing constructions of childhood. When a child is robbed of play, the opportunity to experience joy, self-expression, creativity, and imagination, it is also an example of anti-Black racism of the past informing the present. This is not to suggest that these parallels are completely similar, but rather to amplify the fact that racialized violence persists in the US context and in particular in early childhood spaces. That's my point there.
Thank you for that, Carrie. It's really important to include that historical information. It's not easy to find. It's not easy to find information about what was happening with Black children. I think there may be one or two books about the experience of Black children in slavery, and I've only been able to find one article. So thank you for including that. Yoma.
I have to, you got to take it in. You got to take in Dr. Currington, Dr. Durd, and Dr. Sky. You got to take it in. So I need a moment. But before I jump in, I want to thank, obviously, Aisha and the whole Pride sort of family for creating this space for us to be able to be together, right? So we're a sisterhood who've been working on stuff for so long. And so it's always a sort of a joy and pleasure. Even though 6 o'clock p.m., I'm gonna be blunt. I've been awake since 12 o'clock a.m. Right. So this is the top of the hour. So I may say some stuff. So for those that are out there, I apologize in advance. And I don't drink coffee and I haven't had any alcohol. So it is what it is. But I do want to just thank you all for creating this space. I also do want to acknowledge that I'm a settler in sort of, tribal land, the Lumbee tribe. And I do want to acknowledge as a Black person in America, I want to honor Black bodies, because I think all of that is still connected to the work and the world of racism, early childhood, but really to me, white supremacy, right? So when you think about early childhood, I do think in America at least, I do think that we have to really think about sort of enslaved women taking care of white babies, not because they wanted to, but because they had to, right? And if we kind of follow the whole thread, and I have a whole thing where I write all about the whole thread, including work that Krishana Lloyd and team have written also about the workforce, historical view of the workforce, the early child workforce. I think we recognize that white supremacy is at play, which is in essence why, if we look at our standards, right, I think to Tanya's good point, you don't see anything around African-centered pedagogy. We know they existed, but they're not there, right? Even indigenous knowledge, we know that they're out there, but they don't exist, right? So we know our standards, our training, all that stuff has pretty much in many ways washed Blackness and all that out. But even in our research, so I would say I'm a researcher, do a lot of policy work, and I would say even in the research space, we understand that a lot of our sort of theoretical frameworks, our epistemology, all those things are really white-centered, white supremacy. And so even our research, our policy and practice are all bathed in that. And so as I sort of think about where we are today, right, where literally we have a workforce that we know for a fact is subsidizing our health and our wealth. So basically, we are saying, hey, people, we're like the early childhood matters. Is the brain building time, the first 1,000 days matter, but we're going to pay you basically $10.38, and you're a brain builder. And we wonder why we have to beg for dollars. And I would say, I won't say it anymore, but I would say it's because of racism and sexism. When you understand that this country is bathed in white supremacy, that has pretty much monetized our bodies in many ways, monetized our minds, is evident why we as early child writ large was not thought about in any of the bills, right? People beg for money. The child care is important for our economy. The child care matters. But the problem is that this whole system is constructed under white supremacy. And I think in the end of it, for us to really get to the other side, I say that we have to listen to what Dr. Currington Jolly said, Dr. Durden said, and Dr. Sky said, is that in the end of it, we have to really make it very visible, right? Racism is very invisible. It lives here, it breathes here. Anti-Blackness is here with us. And for us to really think about the next future of early care education, we're going to have to make it pretty clear and blunt how this stuff exists in the ecosystem of early childhood. Most of our leaders are not Black or brown. If you think about any of the early childhood, the major power players, they are not Black and brown. Now, some of them are changing, but they're not Black and brown. So if we need to look at our whole entire body of work, again, I'm not suggesting that white people can't be good leaders, but what I'm suggesting is that by the mere making us invisible, that tells us that we are not worthy to be in this space. And so if we're trying to move forward, we're going to have to address some of these really visible issues, but also this intractable issues of what I say is sexism and racism that's completely baked into everything. So I look forward to the conversation. And I just want to say one last thing, is that I'm hoping that I know there's so many people out there, and I know many of you probably work in this space, and I wanted to sort of applaud you for working in this space. But I'm also going to be pretty blunt about it. Love is not going to feed you. Love is not going to house you. Love is not going to pay that bill when you go to you have COVID-19, you got sick. It's not going to do that. So we cannot continue to use I love kids as a reason why you continue to underpay our workforce, particularly those in community-based programs, those that are not in sort of school-based programs. So I think we have to kind of get around the whole love part. What did Tina Turner say? What love got to do with it? We got to start from there, people.
I think we got some amens in the room. Thank you, Eom, and everyone else as well. I will add too that in one of our trainings, we talk about those issues, and we actually talk about the fact that it has been racism and sexism and classism that have impacted the field. So this next question is pretty open to whoever wants to jump in and respond. And it's a multi-part question, so please bear with me. Sorry that it's so long. Why is focusing on equity so critical now? And what kinds of things are needed in this current environment? So we're thinking about the here and now and why equity is so critical. And then the third part of the question is, could you talk about why our focus should be on anti-racism as opposed to focusing on an anti-bias approach? So I'll repeat it because it was a long question. I apologize. Why is focusing on equity so critical now? What things are needed? And why is anti-racism the thing that we should be engaged in versus anti-bias education? Anyone can jump in.
So, we had this conversation because our book, Don't Look Away, uses the term anti-bias. And so at the time, right, when we wrote this book a few years ago, that was kind of what was on our spirits. That was, the term that really, I think, was capturing at the moment the messages that we wanted to relay. And then as we venture into a more explicit focus on, on race, right, and racism, we thought it was important. We wish we could go back and change the title of the book, but we wanted to say race. We want to say racism, and we wanted to be very explicit that because anti-bias is a very big umbrella term, right? And sometimes in early childhood, I think we hide behind the anti-bias. We've had anti-bias education since the 1980s. And if we look at the data of the outcomes of Black and Brown children, despite all that we know about culturally relevant teaching and anti-bias education, when we look at the academic outcomes, we still trail, and there's still opportunity educational gaps. And so often we hide behind this term of anti-bias because it's safe, right? So anti-bias looks at everything. It looks at gender equity. It looks at exceptionality abilities. It looks at language. It looks at culture. It looks at race. Well, we have in the past couple of years been very unapologetic and saying, no, I'm talking about race. I'm talking about racism. And this is what it looks like, because that's very uncomfortable for us to say, that teaching practice you just did, that, that circle time song, that play activity with the children jumping around and pretending to be monkeys, that's racist, right? And really having those courageous and explicit conversations of the ways in which we're perpetuating racism, not bias, racism in early childhood classrooms. And so when we think about why now, why is this important? It's important because we're dying, right? We're physically in our communities dying because of racism, right? Also, our spirit of our children is being impacted as well. So we have to really have this very explicit conversation and be very brutal and honest, as well as hopeful and joyful that we can address this and that we can move forward if we have the will to really address racism in early childhood.
Wow, thank you, Tanya. Would anybody like to add anything to what she just shared with us?
I'll add, in order to effectively transform a society, transform a situation, you need an accurate diagnosis. Anti-racist does that by explicitly naming the saliency of race and racism in the American context. You see, when you use anti-bias, it tends to lump all these social identities together. And in doing so, race loses its significance. However, if we shift the discourse where anti-racism is prominently centered, then you have no choice but to accept the fact that we are centering race and racism. There are also some conceptual elements of anti-racism that diverge from anti-bias. For example, in anti-racism, we recognize the saliency of lived experiences and subjugated knowledge. Also, the intersectionality aspect is a key part of anti-racism. Anti-racism, furthermore, questions why Black families are often pathologized to the extent in which the school and educators see children as problems and not the systems as problems. Anti-racism is also action-oriented, and I also believe anti-racism from a positionality perspective. I'm going to stir the pot a little bit here. Anti-racism from a positionality perspective, right, speaks more to Black bodies, speaks to our experiences. So the way we would approach anti-racism, right, is a testimony to our embodied knowledge and our desire to create safe, equitable spaces for our children. Anti-racism is Pan-Africanism, it's collective unity, it is radical change for the education system.
Which is so needed. And Yoma, you were going to jump in, and then Stephanie.
Go ahead, Stephanie. I was busy dancing. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say it like, I mean, I agree with what everybody's saying. I'm just gonna add on my little 2 cents that's short and plain, in the sense that if we want to fix a broken system, we have to address the piece that is broken. And we know that we have built an education system for over 400 years. We created and designed an education system that was explicitly racist, that was explicitly excluding children of color. It was never designed to include children of color. And so if we want to fix the system, we have to be upfront and acknowledge that the piece that we're trying to fix that has always been broken is the piece about racism. So we need to talk about it and charge at it.
So I was just going to add, especially to your first question about sort of the word, the equity word, and why now. I would say it was always now. There's always been a now. I think that it's probably even much more so now when there was an opportunity, like obviously during that summer of 2020, the murder of George Floyd, and so many things happened in the pandemic. And we saw there was a moment of where there was potential coalition building that really focused on Black people, like Black Lives Matter. It was actually a thing, right? That people, that no matter what your race, gender, creed, religion, whatever, there was a movement. I was like, it's gonna be short-lived, but it was a movement. And when people see that Black lives actually matter on the deepest of levels, on a psychological level, that scares those in power, aka the white people. And so now they were prepared actually for this. So now you can see there's all this movement of really anti-Blackness, not just from white people, but also from Black and brown people. And so to me, now is even more important, because now there is a particular push to make sure that whole awakening in summer of 2020 does not continue to happen, right? That begins to change the power dynamics, the human dignity of Black and brown people, the joy of Black and brown people, the progress of Black and brown people. So to me, I think it's important that we continue, right? To me, it was always a now, but the things that we have to continue the work and realize that just because, a few people were elected, like President Obama was elected, and some people are like, oh, we're good, we're not racist anymore, right? That was a lot of us knew that was not true, but we know good faction thought we are good, we are post-racial. And so I think it's a reminder that, to me, equity is probably, I think, is more of the anti-racism. That I think equity is another sort of like, I don't like to use it too much now, because I feel like it's been in some ways bastardized, right? People think of equity as equality, as all kids, they put equity in all. I'm like, that's not what that means really, but whatever. So for me, I think it's really important that we are always in the now moment, and we recognize that, while we're still here together, like Aisha, you get to do this platform that probably wasn't even here, 10 years ago, right? So I think we're always trying to figure out how do we continue to move progress forward, even though we know that we probably have a boot on our neck. We probably know they're going to just try to sort of change the system as we try to catch up. So for me, I think that I'm hoping that we continue to see that the master of this house is always working. We can never sleep in this house. This house is not built for us, but we got to figure out how do we undo it, and we can't use his tools. And I just put in the chat box a paper that we wrote just to speak to what my friends and colleagues were speaking about, is that we have to name these things. Like if you think about it, racism in early childhood was never talked about, because they're like, we love, look, early childhood started because Black kids, we love you, all this and that. But if you look at the actual way the Head Start started, it was about culturally deprived kids. That was the language used. Head Start till today has never apologized for that language. You cannot be anti-racist if you have not actually apologized for the way that you said that the reason we started an 8-week program is because you were coming from a culturally deprived group of people. So to me, until you publicly acknowledge that is the beginning, then maybe that's what reparations is about. Reparations is not about money. Reparations is not only about money. Reparations is about, you got to repair the harm you have done. And as much as I love Head Start, I was a Head Start fellow, I work with Head Start today, I still recognize that you could be anti-poverty and still not be anti-racist. And so to me, part of what we have to continue to push is that all these people performing stuff, you put anti-racism and you're like anti-racist, you put equity, you're equity. No, we have to look at what you have done historically, and have you repaired the damage that says that we were culturally deprived, because the system of Head Start has not fully acknowledged that, and it has not been fully fixed either. So to me, I want us to continue to push those who are supposed to work on behalf of us to make some repairs, to acknowledge that damage that is still occurring, and then maybe we can move forward. But until then, I'm going to still give you a side eye because of how you started. Again, most of us still work with Head Start, all of that, but I think we have to hold people accountable, because we are a community. If you're my community, I'm going to hold you accountable, just like you should hold me accountable for anything that I have done wrong. But I think it's the point that we continue to think about equity is about fixing and addressing historical injustices. Until you have done that, you are not doing equity. You're doing something else. You ain't doing equity. You ain't doing anti-racism. You just doing. So I do want us to really, I think, hold our early childhood institutions, programs, leaders, all of them accountable, because in the end of it, when you start with culturally deprived, that means that people that look like me and look like my kids, you often see us as subhuman, as personhood, as Carrie Ann has articulated.
So some more amens in the room, please. Thank you. And the other thing that I would add is, part of the problem is, just like most Americans don't have a solid understanding of American history, which would entail understanding America's racial history, early educators do not have an understanding of the history of early education, which would entail learning about the racial consequences of early education. So I'm going to put a plug in that you ladies need to create a course, because there are people who need to learn about this in higher ed. They are not learning about it in higher ed. And I'm sure you all know that already.
Aisha, can I just say one more thing? I'm not, and I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that we should crash and burn Head Start, right? I'm not saying that per se, right? But I am saying, I want us to also understand that if you don't actually address the historical stuff, right, you can't do a speed bump through it and then say, oh my goodness, I ran you over, my bad. I didn't mean to run you over, but my bones are broken. I got no mouth, I got no teeth. And so I think it's important that in many ways, because we want Head Start to continue to thrive, to do the work of where they're in every single community in America, we want them to be able to provide those comprehensive services. But we also, I think in many ways, need to make sure that we don't cover the law of the doo-doo smell, right? Like, we got to make sure that we're saying we want you to be even better than what you are today. And you can't do that if we just act like, oh, you're all good and there's nothing wrong with you.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. That was clear to me already, though. So you did mention earlier on Ioma, white supremacy. So while I think that many early educators have probably heard the term white supremacy and know that it exists, that might not be the case. I think it's safe to say that they may not believe that it exists in early childhood spaces. So in what ways would you say that white supremacy shows up in early childhood education? You spoke, all of you spoke to that a little bit in answering the first question, but is there anything that you would add to that? And how can it be addressed? How is it showing up and how can it be addressed?
Carrie Ann, I know you got a master class on this. Go ahead and tell the people.
This revolutionary spirit is just trying to keep calm. But I can't.
No, what you trying to hold back? Let's do this.
Okay, first, just basic preliminary definitions here. White supremacy cannot exist without white power and privilege, both of which have been amassed through slavery. So coming back to the point about reparation, yes, we need reparation because in a capitalist society, who has power is the ones who have money. All right. So coming back to my point about the manifestations of white supremacy in early childhood spaces, it comes across in various ways. For example, what is the curriculum that is being used in early childhood? Does it center Black children? What is the type of pedagogy? And I'll relate that to play-based curriculum. For the most part, dominant developmental theories underscore play-based curriculum, which avoids the cultural knowledges of other groups that can inform play-based learning. So in my work, I advocate for a broader conceptualization of play. All right. Second, who is represented in these spaces? Let's look at the representation of paraprofessionals versus the educators. Who is the assistant? And who is the teacher? Who is the administrator? Also, another manifestation of power and privilege is, in many instances, the lack of clearly explicit, stated anti-racist policies that would protect Black children and their families. Another way in which it manifests is, for example, when racial incidents occur in an early childhood space, and a Black child is traumatized, and a Black child is in pain because his identity, right, has been violated. How is this particular incident taken up? It is just swept under the rug? Or are there consequences for those actions, for those behaviors? To sum it all up, white power and white privilege gets to determine who is represented, how they are represented, if race is discussed, if race and racism are not discussed, and also how Black children are given the opportunity to see themselves and to recognize that they too are individuals with divine destinies and God-given dignity and self-worth.
I just want to add like one little thing. I think the other way that it comes up, in addition to all the stuff that Carrie Ann just said, is in the discipline and the punitiveness of the discipline, and that at the heart of that punitive discipline and these disciplinary disparities that we see is the idea that Black children need to be controlled, and that they can and should, and it is allowable for them to control them in a way that is dehumanizing and control them in a way that denies them access to learning. And I think that is the very, very root of it. So when we're talking about the problems in discipline, it's really not a problem of right now. It's a problem that's going way, way, way back to how we think about these children and how we think they should be managed and controlled.
Thank you, Carrie Ann and Stephanie. Tanya and Ioma, did you have anything to add, or can we just move on?
Yeah, you can move on. I'm tired of talking about white supremacy.
Okay.
All the way on. I'm exhausted with this conversation.
Okay.
Yes, that is right. Let Tanya do what she does. Bring the joy.
Okay.
Let her free. Let her free. We're all ready. Let her free.
All right. Thank you. So this next question is a little more focused because there's some aspects that apply specifically to you as individuals. And it is, what kinds of things can be done to address racism in early education in the areas of research, policy, classroom pedagogy, and the workforce, and advocacy? And I wanted to start with you, Yoma, with policy and advocacy. Are those fit okay with you?
Those fit fine. I mean, I do all the above, but yes, I'll just stick to two of them. But
Okay.
all of us do a lot of stuff because our minds are so intersectional that way. So I would say, obviously, you said policy and advocacy. Okay, let me try. Okay, so obviously, and I have to think about my research, policy, advocacy. So I think first of all, I think when it comes to policy, for me and you, and I think there'll be some links dropped in eventually, that we understand the power of policy. Policy is what maintains. Sorry, Tanya, white supremacy is what maintains racism, because racism is a tool, is a structured tool that was structured in our policies, whether in our state and local policies and also in our national regulations, et cetera. So we have to understand that policy is really the thing that keeps things going. Is the thing that says, you teacher, if you're in a community-based program, you are a childcare provider. But if you're in a school district, you are a teacher, right? So policies actually structure opportunities, they structure dehumanization, they structure privileges. And so that means that we can't walk around when somebody says, oh, this policy is good for Black and brown people. You can't, I would say that there's no policy America has created that is race neutral. I know the policymakers tell you that, they're like, oh, don't worry, this is perfect. No, if a policymaker tells you this is race neutral, that's a lie. Most policies, not all of them arguably, are actually white-centered policies. Right. So when they even try to do policies that may benefit Black people or brown people. So for example, I'll give you one good example. We have a policy called the child tax credit, right? That just happened. They did it for 6 months. They said, oh my goodness, this is going to take Black and Latino kids, you're going to be out of poverty for 6 months. That's what they said. And then when they said, let's pass it permanently, they said, we don't have money for that, but we got money to give tax cuts to corporations and billionaires, right? So understand that every single policy is white-centered until you say, okay, let's really do a deeper dive on to what extent is this policy addressing the disparities that will ensure that it's a plus for, say, Black people, for Latino people, et cetera. So when I do policy, I do anti-racist policy making, at least analyses, is that I look to see to what extent is this policy going to ensure that Black people, for example, are going to benefit above and beyond white people. Because if you're not benefiting above and beyond those in power, that policy is pretty much neutral. It doesn't do anything for you. So the same thing with early childhood. We have to continue to ask, what policies are we passing that's going to benefit, say, Black people, for example? We can say Latinos or Native, but let's say Black people, for example. What policies can we pass, whether at the state or local level, that's going to actually make it that where Black people would benefit at a higher level? There's not a lot of policies like that. Some of them may be around housing. So think about it, right? The fact that Black people, less than 50% of Black people actually own homes. And we know that for you to get sort of housing benefits, you have to be in the K-12 system. Who's less likely to be in the K-12 system? Black and brown folks. Who's likely to be in the K-12 system? White women or white people. So I think we need to really think about, are there policies that could actually turn the tide to ensure that we're more likely to be healthy in many different ways, we're more likely to be wealthy in many different ways, right? And until we have those policies and really ask those questions, we're going to continue to sort of support policies that are really just neutral. They just maintain the gap and everything keeps going forward. So now, and that's related to advocacy, because obviously as us researchers per se, we can't, obviously there's a line between lobbying and advocacy. Some people could be more on the lobbying end if you're a C4, et cetera. But for most of us, we can't per se advocate, but we could for sure say, this is not going to work for us, our Black community, our brown community. This is going to exacerbate inequities, blah, 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 blah. So we can say all those things. But I think it's important, at least for me as a researcher, as that in that space, that I'm partnering with community-based organizations to provide the data, to look at to kind of give them a sense of what is the theory or what's the conceptual framework around this whole entire policy or program? Have you looked at the impact, good or bad, on Black or brown people? So we need to, I think, so for me, I think it's important for us to partner with advocates in ways that says, here's what our data is telling us. Here's what we should focus on. So for example, the data we do has found that minimum wage actually does really benefit Black people at a much higher level. as well as Medicaid expansion benefits Black people at a much higher level. Income tax credit benefits Black people at a much higher level. So I'm listing all the things that was in the Build Back Better that never got passed. Because we know that when you pass certain things that's going to actually benefit Black people at a much higher level, I can guarantee you that America will never pass it unless we are strategic in what we decide to do. So that's where advocacy to me comes into play. We have to begin to really think through, how do we advocate? How do we sort of create leadership? How do we make sure that we're actually voting? How do we make sure that we're filling out the census? There's things that we need to understand the way things work for us to at least amass some level of power, as we're only 12% of the population. And I'll finish in a second. I will guarantee you that the plan of America is actually to dilute our power. Because if you think about it, they have other groups that will eventually say, we're more important than Black people. Y'all are only 12%. We're about to be 18. We're about to be 22. You're going to be just 10%. So we have to also understand that we are systematically being diluted because other groups have been added to it. And so I'll just leave you with one thought. Read the book, Making Hispanics. Again, it's not to perjure other people of color, but I want us to understand that America is a stratified system, and it's between white people on the top, as they have created, and Black people at the bottom. The closer you ascend to whiteness, the more you believe you're going to be closer to being free and have all the access. The closer you are to Blackness, you're in trouble. And so they're creating a lot of tools that dilute us, and we need to understand the importance of a coalition building across racial groups, economic groups, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much for that, Ioma. A lot to think about. Stephanie, you wanted to add something?
Yes, this is what I was going to say. I put the link to the book you just mentioned in the chat. But the other thing I was going to say, when Ioma was like, they're trying to dilute us in terms of power, I also want to say that, let's be explicitly clear, they're trying to dilute us in pure population numbers. And when we see our community violence that has risen, have people been watching the news lately? All of a sudden now, it seems like it is worse than it has been in a long time. And there are so many people in our communities that are being killed and murdered. And it is not by accident. It is not by accident.
Thank you. I have to agree. So which of you would like to take responding to the question in terms of research? So what needs to be done to address racism in early education in the area of research? And I know any of you could do that, but who wants to take that one?
So I'll do this one real quick so I can leave time for Tanya. So with the joy. So be thinking, Tanya, be thinking. So I think that one of the things that we are all trying to do, that we're involved in now, is educating future generations of scholars to come to the table and to do this work from a strengths-based framework. So we have the Riser Network, which we're all a part of, that really is intentional about like how we build this sort of like intergenerational sort of knowledge base. And some of the things that we've been doing with Riser is not only just creating a system of support, for us, but also helping to educate the larger research community around the theories that Black people have put forward for decades about Black child development. There was an FCD webinar. I think Ioma and Tanya, I think you all were on that one. We did a whole FCD webinar around research. So we are trying our hardest to make sure that we're preparing future generations and this current generation too about how to do research in this positive kind of way.
Well, I hope the folks who are instructors are taking note of all this and sharing this information with their students, so we can spread the word. Did you want to add anything, Tanya?
I think that it's important for our research, our teaching, our advocacy, and our policy to align, right, with what we say, and also how we move in our respective spheres of influence. So if I say I'm anti-racist, then as a researcher, I should conduct research that has methodological practices that is anti-racist, right? If I say that it's important to promote anti-racist teaching practices in early childhood, I should, as a teacher educator, engage with teacher candidates in an anti-racist manner. If I say that I'm all about equity and anti-racism, then I should promote policies, write about policies, advocate for policies that are anti-racist. And so what I find a lot is we a whole lot of talk. And we like to use the language of anti-racism and the language of equity, but we do not demonstrate it in our actions. We do not demonstrate it in our knowledge. You know, everybody who know me know that I think I'm Beyonce of academics, you know? And so I literally, you know, talk like this because I can back it up, ask my students. So it's a part of what I do, right? So I don't just talk about anti-racism. I just don't talk about culturally relevant teaching. I try to live it and demonstrate it, become better at it, because you have to grow and learn and understand your own isms that you bring to the table. And so I think when we're thinking about these constructs of workforce and thinking about these constructs of policy and research, we also have to check ourselves, check our professional egos, to make sure that we're really walking in this space where we're serving as a model, right? So when you see me, you know what I'm about. Before I even open up my mouth, Google me, you know who it is. But if it's a little fuzzy where I really don't know, you know, whether or not you're really about that life, then that's problematic. And unfortunately, I meet a lot of researchers, a lot of policy people, a lot of community advocates who's really not about that life. They may be about the money. They may be about the clout. They may be about especially the financial gain that, and I'm going to use this term, that pimping, you know, Black children will provide for them, but they're really not about that equity and anti-racist life. And so I'm hopeful and joyful that we will really hold people, you know, as Dr. Iruka mentioned earlier, accountable and say, no, you're not really about that life. And come talk to me when you're really about that life, because all of the women that's on this panel, we live it. That's who we are. And we're unapologetically about that life. Just Google us, just Google.
So can I add, I mean, I feel like Tanya raised up a couple of things, and also Stephanie raised up a couple of things, which is that we have come to see that a lot of people are in essence using us, right? Like now that there's a funding, sort of like there's equity funding, you know, that everything has equity now, which I'm like, I don't even know what it means. And what we have now is what we call equity tourists, right? So people who are exactly like, as Dr. Darter said, who are sort of performing this whole entire thing, and there's a monetary value to it, right? So this is not different than the enslavement period, right? When they basically sold our family, our body, all those sort of things. And so in some ways we're in that space. And I would say part of the work that we're trying to do is obviously the Rising Network. We try to create a community, but at the same time, we're trying to change the water, right? So also changing the ways funders are functioning, right? How they see us as brilliant, excellent scholars who don't need a white person next to us to do the work, because they steal from us, just to be blunt about it. Let's be blunt about that part, right? So I think that we're trying to change the water. We're also trying to change the content of it, right? Because in the end of it, you can't do anti-racist work if you're not been measuring it, right? So to me, examining disparities is not the same as really measuring and understanding how the system of oppression, dehumanization works. So I think we're also trying to at least begin. I'm not saying that we're doing perfect work here. What I'm saying is that we're trying to make sure the research is being done in a way that really is trying to move towards sort of anti-racism and all of it is ways in decolonization, all of its ways. Again, some of us have to go through unlearning and relearning, right? Because in the end of it, some of us have been drinking this water since we were basically in our mama's womb. So a lot of us are in that whole entire process. And I will also point out that I'm in a predominantly white institution. And so I think we also have to understand that when you're in these spaces, there's a level of stress that comes with when you're doing this work. And I'm at UNC Chapel Hill. Like y'all could Google that one. And we're in the news. We're being sued. Nicole Hannah cursed us out. So 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 as the oldest public university that literally gave money to confer of our daughters to protect the statue, but won't give $2 million to bring sort of a brilliant, scholars here. We're also having to fight the fight of white institutions while we also try to do the work that's going to be liberatory to both our people, to ourselves, and others. So to me, the work of anti-racism is not just about the work itself. It's also about how we function as a community, right? The fact that we have each other, we have a luxury of doing that. We can at least depend on each other for personal, professional, social, emotional, support. And we're trying to create that, because when you're trying to fight this kind of stuff on many levels, you need as much armor, you need as much help and support. And so I do hope that people see that the research part is hard, but we're trying to be part of changing the whole entire water and the whole entire process as much as we can.
And I just wanted to add briefly to that in terms of the research, anti-racist research specifically, and I'm referring to qualitative research conducted with Black children in particular, should be highlighting how Black children conceptualize and enact their resistance and agency. We want to move away from the preoccupation of focusing solely on oppression and racism, although those are valid, experiences. But there's another element of anti-racist research, and it is joy, and it is resistance, and it is hope. So from my perspective, when conducting research with children, make space for them to articulate how they are resisting racism. And I say this because in a recent research I conducted with Black children in Omaha, I had the pleasure of hearing these students, indicate how they see themselves as agents of change. For instance, one student told me, just call me president of equal rights. That's what the name he chose, as a pseudonym. He said, call me president of equal rights. Another one said, you know what? I want to use the name Black Lives Matter. So when I quote her in this paper, it will be Black Lives Matter. She said, hashtag Black Lives Matter. And when I posed the question to one of the students, what does it mean to be white? He looked at me and said, with so much self-assurance and pride, I don't know what it means to be white, but I sure love being Black. All right. So that is just in summary of why we need to just shift the trajectory of anti-racist research, not only include the voices of children, but to include their experiences with resisting racism.
Can I add one other thing to this pot? And this goes back to the idea of people pimping us, right? What I always say, I have a slide that typically appears at one of the last slides of all of my presentations. And in that slide, it has all of our books, because Don't Look Away, great book. We love it. Everybody's paying attention to it. Awesome. But how many books did we write before that, y'all? We wrote 3 or 4 books before that. So we have been consistent in terms that we have been doing this work consistently, speaking this knowledge, building a knowledge base consistently before the world woke up, right? And so what I urge you all to do as educators, as other researchers as well, when you are in a space and you see people, when you see white people co-opting our work and using us, I urge you to say something. I urge you to question their credibility out loud and to say, did you just discover this? Are you doing this just because there's a funding announcement for it? And I urge you to also put our body of work up in their face to say, well, do you know that Dr. Carrie-Anna Skye has been writing papers about this since 2012? And so we can't just do it without you all, because they will come in and just steamroll and get all the good, get all the goods, take it and use it to continue to build up their wealth, their power, and then in the end, when it's out of fashion, when it's out of vogue, we're still going to be in the same place. We're still going to be left in the same place.
Exactly. And we've seen a lot of that waning interest already, right? Since there was a high point after the murder of George Floyd. So yeah, I understand exactly what you mean, Stephanie. So this is the point at which although I had a few more questions, I just don't have the time to get to them. We are going to take a poll from our audience. And after that, we're going to take a few questions from the audience. We're going to wait for those results to come in.
It said that the host and the panelists can't vote. I was trying to vote.
Yes, you try to pad the vote, huh?
Learned a whole lot.
You over there in Atlanta, you need to be over there at the voting line.
Okay. I think we're there. Thank you. We will hold on to that information. Just for your information, you all can see the poll, yes or no? Yeah.
Not the results. I can't see the results. You can see the poll question.
Okay. Yeah. So we have an overwhelming positive response from folks about tonight's event, just so you know. So far I've gotten one question from Medina. Maybe we'll get another one before you're done answering this first one. And it says, can you speak to how to get the buy-in from early education professionals that are not aware or may not see this as important at all? How do you get buy-in from folks who are just not there yet?
So I think this is a very important question, and this is one of the things that I reflect upon a lot. And a part of our consistent messaging is that this work is not an option, is not an elective, is not something that you should take after you take, the health and safety mandated, trainings for your center, for your school. It should be just as important as those health and safety standards that we so value in early childhood. And so a part of my messaging has always been, how are we centering race and culture in everything that we talk about and everything that we do? How are we ensuring that children, particularly racially marginalized children, have access to a culturally responsive, safe environment that elevates and accelerates their learning and holistic development? So that's it. Everything else falls under. So for those early childhood educators who are reluctant, then it's our role and our responsibility to continue to center that this is early childhood education. Like, this is early childhood. So all of that other stuff that we've crafted as benchmarks of quality, as professional standards of learning, really does not center cultural race as a construct that's important when we think about all of these other domains. And so when we're thinking about how do we help individuals buy in, that's not the question. The question is not buy-in. The question is, how can we ensure that we center this topic in everything that we do? And until we have a will, and until we are consistent in that messaging, we're going to continue to see this research and these reports about inequity and racism that's occurring in early childhood education.
Thank you, Tanya.
I thought you were going to say Tanya just fired them. Right.
Well, or don't let them in your program. Don't let them in your program. I'm trying to be graceful. Like, if you had on this panel a year ago, you know how it would have went down. But I'm learning to do this, honey. Do you see the change? Do you see the change in me?
Yes. That's what 2021 should have said. They should have just been fired, right? Yeah. Because theoretically, right, ethically and morally, right, we have to understand, when somebody hires you to do a job, there's a code of ethics, there's expectations. Now, you get a couple of, maybe 90 days reprieve to get it together. If you don't get it together, then you got to go, right? And I'm being facetious because it's 6:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I think the reality is that buy-in on trying to ensure that children, I think to my other panelists, joyful and are human and are sort of experiencing love and affirmation. I should not have to sell that to you, right? That should be part of how you are fully trained. But that speaks to early childhood and how we created not even a system. Early childhood is not a system. I know we think it is, but it's really a bifurcated system with a good chunk of it not really run from the federal side or from the state side, right? So it's really a bifurcated system. So we don't have a system That means that you can have different and disparate kind of expectations. And so the fact is that we should have already expected this. But when it comes to sort of Black kids in particular, but other kids of color, it's almost like, okay, well, we'll take into consideration what you may need. It's not a priority. And so for me, the question, I agree with Ty, it's not about buy-in, is how do we ensure that we have at least a bottom, like a bottom, and that bottom has to include anti-racist, anti-bias, culturally responsive practice. Like, to me, it shouldn't even be a question. The fact that we're having to, exactly like your to the questioner's point, to get buy-in means that we clearly are doing injustice. It is not about the adults. It's really about our children who suffer. As a mother of 2 Black kids, that is why I feared my kids ever going into early childhood. I did not want them to enter any program if they didn't have a camera on their buttons or they couldn't speak, because I could not trust that they were going to keep them safe. And here I am, got a whole degree, at least I think you can Google me, like Tanya said, and I know that I could not protect them until at least they knew the words and could tell me what had happened today. And so I think it's important that we realize that this should not be the question, but sadly that is the question. That means that we got a lot of work to do to really, I'll stop there.
Well, this just happened to me, right? About a month ago, I have a 2, 4, and 6-year-old. And so my 4-year-old, who's a little Black boy, he came home with an incident where a teacher did this, think. And so after, addressing the issue, because it was definitely, and the teacher was white, it definitely was a racial, situation. So we're talking to the director, she's like, well, what should I do? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't want that teacher anywhere near, my child. And then secondly, you have to think about if you're really providing an environment that's safe for children, right? And ethically, I don't want to shut you down and this center down, because I try to walk light, but I can kind of pull that card. But ethically, I cannot, sit here and allow her engage with any other child in this building. She's definitely not going to engage with my child anymore. But knowing the racial undertones of that action, regardless of her putting her hands on my child, you really have to think, director, leader, who's also white, about what health and safety actually means. Because for my Black son, that threatened his health and his safety. That was violence, not only physical violence, but also spiritual and racial and cultural violence. And it was racism. And so I think it's important. And that was my own child, right? And so when we see something and we hear something, that we have to speak out, and we have to hold those accountable for their actions, or we're perpetuating the very things of racism, that we continue to talk about and to profit from.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing that personal experience, Tanya. I think we have to tell those stories all the time because, as you were saying earlier on, a lot of times it's really theoretical for a lot of people, and it's not something that's actually personal. So I have another question, and maybe we'll be able to squeeze in one more. This one is, do you have resources for finding developmental milestones inclusive of children of color?
So I'll take this one, right? Because I kind of started us off with talking about that. And I would say that we actually don't. We don't have like a book. We don't have a paper that tells us this. But what I used to do in graduate school, and I just encourage like all scientists, all graduate students to think about this, is that I would read the paper, whatever paper they assign us, right? And it's coming from a certain framework, whatever is assigned to us is coming from that white dominant framework. And as they're listing out the milestones of when children are learning how to do certain things and showing different skills, then I would go to read all these different articles that would have samples of Black children. And then I would make sure that I took out and I clearly understood and I lined up when in the developmental sequence Black children start to do these things. And I did that intentionally for like everything that I read, which meant I had to read extra stuff. I could not just I could not just trust. I could not just settle on what they gave me to read on that syllabus. I had to go and do outside reading on my own, right? And so when I did that, it helped me get a foundation and an understanding for what the developmental sequence might and timing might be like for Black children. So I use that in terms of research. I also use it in terms of my lived experience and my interactions, my teaching, with children of color, et cetera, so that I could understand that I'm trying to create my own framework, because I know that the dominant framework is flawed. So I think that there's no one answer. It's not sitting somewhere for us. You have to continually be questioning and seeking out the answer on your own.
And I'll just add to that, if we're looking at social emotional development from a transformative anti-racist lens, children's identity, their racial identity development falls within that category. And there are theories that clearly delineate the age stage progression of children's racial identity development. For example, around 3 or 4 years of age, they recognize skin color differences. Around 4 or 5, they start attributing meanings to these differences. So if you wanted to cultivate, for example, a positive racial identity, there are ample resources on how children's ages coincide with what they know and what they think about race.
And I have moved away from developmental milestones because especially for Black and Indigenous and Brown children, it has been very limiting. And I constantly am amazed just by my own children and other children that I engage with. And so I try not to even refer to any developmental milestones because that limits their potential and their ancestral, excellence that they have and the brilliance that they have. So I try not to even focus on anything related to milestones because I know our children are capable of far exceeding.
Thank you, Carrie and Tanya. It is now time for us to announce our raffle winners. We had a couple other questions. We just do not have enough time to get to them because we only have 2 minutes left in our program. And the raffle winners are Aisha Ray and Linda Vincent. And I've been wanting to meet Aisha Ray for a long time, the other Aisha. So maybe this will be a way for us to get to
Where's
meet.
Aisha? Yes, Dr.
Where
Ray.
is Aisha?
Yes,
That's the
Dr.
other
Ray.
Aisha we love.
Yes. And she had a question, and I'm sorry, Aisha, we did not have time to get to your question. I'm going to wrap things up. So we will actually get your email addresses, and we will use your email addresses to contact you so we can get your home addresses and get your books mailed directly to you. So congratulations to our winners. Remember, everybody, that you will be receiving a link to today's recording soon, along with links to the resources that were provided by our guests. They'll be showing up in a minute in the slide deck. Also, in a day or so, you'll receive a link to our follow-up survey. Hopefully, some of you will respond to that. We know that there's a low percentage of people who respond to surveys, but I'm going to do a push for that. You also will be entered for a chance to win a copy of the book as well. I have to say that this evening really unquestionably exceeded my expectations. There was so much insight shared, such important messages, such great information, starting with Lisa's great presentation of her activity. Thank you, Lisa, Stephanie, Tanya, Carrie Ann, and Ioma. I hope you all enjoyed tonight as much as I have, and I can't wait for the new book to come out. Maybe there's time for you to plug the book. Can you do it right now?
Stay tuned. It should be out sometime next in 2023.
Okay.
And the manual, say the manual.
I already forgot. My brain can't think. It's 7 o'clock. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to come out and to work with you all again. It's truly been an honor. And to our audience, thank you all so much for joining us. Our 2023 speaker series will kick off sometime in the spring, and we hope to see you all again then. Have a great evening, everybody, and thanks once again. Thank you. We needed 2.5 hours.
Hold on, Aisha. Let me stop the YouTube. Heidi, can you make me host? Oh.